Ever catch yourself just, I don't know, staring off into space? And it kind of hits you, like, what does it even mean to be conscious?
Yeah,
It's such a weird question when you actually think about it.
it really is.
It's like we all know what it feels like, I think.
Right.
But explaining it, totally different story.
Yeah, and it's funny, it's just like philosophers have been wrestling with this forever, you know?
Oh, absolutely, for centuries.
And now suddenly it's this like huge thing in neuroscience, AI, all this cutting edge stuff.
It's true. Like, it's not just abstract thinking anymore.
Right.
Which I guess is why you pointed us to this Dr. Fabio Di Bello. He's doing some really interesting research. He calls them like these improbable scenarios, these thought experiments about consciousness.
Mm.
And it definitely gets you thinking in a new way.
Yeah, what grabs me about his work is he talked about how for so long consciousness was pretty much stuck in philosophy class or, maybe theology.
Like a religious thing almost.
Exactly. But it's only recently that science, like actual brain science, has jumped in.
And even then, how do you measure something that feels so different for everybody? I mean, my joy probably looks different from yours in my brain, right?
Exactly. That's the thing. It's like, how do you measure qualia?
Qualia, right?
That feeling of what it's like to experience something.
Like, we can see the brain light up on those fMRI scans and all.
Right.
But that doesn't tell us what it's like to be that person.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, okay, if we don't even fully get our own consciousness,
Yeah.
how in the world do we measure it?
Yeah.
In us or anything else?
Well, that's where Di Bello, he points to some interesting leads. Like, have you heard of integrated information theory?
Oh, yeah, IIT, right. That's
Mhm.
all about information and how complex it is, isn't it?
Exactly. So Tononi, he's the one who came up with it. And he argues that consciousness comes from how information is connected within a system.
So the more interconnected, the more conscious.
Basically, yeah. The more interwoven and dependent it all is, the higher the level of consciousness.
And that level, there's a name for it, right? Phi.
Phi. Yep. More phi, more consciousness. That's the idea.
So like a human brain, high phi. But like my phone, probably pretty low.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really wild. Even if we can measure this phi, even if it matches up with what we think is consciousness,
Yeah.
how do we know it's the same kind of consciousness?
Oh, wow.
It could be experiencing things in ways we can't even imagine.
So we could be measuring something without actually knowing what it is.
It's a real head-scratcher, and it gets even more complicated with AI.
Oh, for sure, because if a computer gets complex enough, who's to say?
Exactly. Could a machine have a phi high enough to be considered conscious? And if so, what does that even mean?
Which is a question, thankfully, Dr. Di Bello tackles head-on in this interview. He lays out some of the biggest what-ifs in the field, doesn't he?
He does, and he doesn't shy away from them either.
Like, he brings up two major schools of thought about AI and consciousness.
Oh, yeah, and they're about as different as you can get.
Totally different ends of the spectrum.
Right, so you've got folks like Tononi who believe consciousness just emerges. Like if the system's complex enough, boom, there it is.
So, like, the right code, a powerful enough computer, artificial consciousness.
Well, it's more nuanced, but you've got the right idea.
But then you've got Roger Penrose. He throws a wrench in that whole idea, right?
Oh, absolutely. He's got this whole other theory, the Or theory. And he says it's not just about processing power. He brings in quantum mechanics. Like, our brains are doing something computers just can't.
Okay, so one says we're on the verge of sentient machines. The other says it's fundamentally impossible with our current tech.
It's a pretty big gap between the two, yeah.
It's a huge gap.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder about the future of AI, really.
It does, and more importantly, maybe what it even means for us.
Totally, because if we can create conscious machines, then what? Talk about ethical dilemmas.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's where Di Bello's insights get really interesting, I think.
Yeah, it's like, it's one thing to talk about AI consciousness as this abstract idea, but then you bring in the real world and it gets real fast.
Oh, totally. Like, he brings up self-driving cars. And it's like, we're already kind of sort of trusting them, right?
Right.
But what happens when it's a life or death split-second decision? Do we really want to hand that over to an algorithm?
It's a huge responsibility to just put on lines of code.
And it's not just cars either. He talks about algoretics was the word, I think.
Algoretics, yeah, like making ethical decisions, something a computer can do.
But how do you even begin to program something as complex as ethics?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And he quotes someone saying, oh, this is good. Trying to code ethics is like trying to teach a robot to understand poetry.
Ooh, I like that.
Like, you might get the words right, but the meaning is going to be lost.
Totally. And even if you could, like, whose ethics are we talking about? The programmers. The corporations that own these AIs.
Exactly, whose values get baked in. It's a huge can of worms.
Reminds me of that whole thing with the Google engineer, you remember?
Oh yeah, the one who said their AI became sentient. Wild.
He was like, this AI, it's like a super smart kid, we got to treat it right. Put his whole job on the line for it.
It really makes you think, what would it take to convince us a machine was conscious?
Right. Like if it could hold a conversation, seem emotional, even say it's conscious.
Is that enough? Or is there something more, some spark we can't replicate?
Takes us back to the Turing test, doesn't it?
Hmm.
We can test how well a machine talks, solves problems, all that. But how do you test for an inner experience?
And as Di Bello points out, a consciousness detector, that's still sci-fi territory.
For sure, we can barely measure it in ourselves, let alone a computer.
But here's the kicker. We're building more and more complex AI every day.
And this is where it gets kind of creepy. He used the example of like China's surveillance system. Not saying it's some sentient supercomputer watching everyone.
Right, not HAL 9000 yet.
But the scale of it, the constant data processing, learning, could that, I don't know, could that create the conditions for something to emerge?
It's a chilling thought, taking Tononi's ideas about information to the extreme.
Like we're building these giant systems that never stop analyzing, evolving.
Right.
What if we create something we don't understand and can't control?
It's enough to make you want to go off the grid, live in a cabin somewhere.
Seriously. But to be fair, Di Bello doesn't just leave us on a dark note. He talks about some potentially good things this phi idea could do, like in medicine, helping us understand patients who are in a vegetative state.
Oh, right, because right now it's so difficult to know what they're experiencing, if they're conscious at all, or to what degree.
So phi could help us make better decisions about their care, especially those really tough end-of-life decisions.
Potentially, yeah. And Di Bello really stresses this, we got to be so careful. Just because we have a number doesn't mean we truly understand what's happening inside. It's not like a consciousness scorecard.
It's true. It all takes us back to the mystery of it all. We don't even fully get our own inner world, let alone a machine's.
And that's where he brings up this really fascinating point about anesthesia. Like, under general anesthesia, it's like time and consciousness just stop. Someone hit the pause button on your existence.
So weird, right? 1 minute you're there, the next, nothing, then you wake up. So do we just cease to exist under anesthesia?
It really challenges our assumptions about consciousness. Our brains are still active, just differently, so it's not an on-off switch.
So maybe we need a whole new way of thinking about it.
Maybe we need a physics of interiority, as Di Bello puts it.
A physics of interiority. Now that's an idea.
Like, just as we have laws governing the physical world, maybe there are laws, or at least principles, governing the inner world of experience.
Okay, now we're getting really out there, but I kind of love it. It's that sense of mystery and possibility that got me hooked on this topic in the first place. It's like, we're talking about these big, almost philosophical questions.
Yeah.
But then you've got people like Elon Musk out there talking about neural implants, like actually trying to merge with consciousness.
Right, like literally plugging into the brain.
And he's serious. He says one day we'll be able to record our experiences, share them, download someone else's memories, all that. Is that even remotely possible?
Di Bello, he's surprisingly open to it, actually. He says there's no law of physics saying it's impossible to capture those experiences, but, he says, the ethical side of things, whoa, boy, that's a whole other story.
For sure. I mean, if you could download someone's deepest thoughts, feelings, should you? And who owns that information? It's kind of terrifying.
It is. And to his credit, Di Bello doesn't shy away from that stuff.
Not at all. He goes right for those tough questions, which I think is what makes him so interesting to listen to.
Totally. He's not just caught up in the science. He's thinking about the human cost.
Right. Like, what does all this mean for us?
Exactly. And he actually ends the interview talking about, education.
Education. Like, what do we need to be teaching kids in this weird future we're making?
He says future doctors especially, they'll need more than just the medical stuff.
More than just, knowing how to treat diseases, all that.
Way more. He's talking ethics, philosophy, even spirituality.
Whoa! Okay, that's intense.
Right. Because if we're blurring the lines between human and machine, we better figure out what makes us human in the first place.
It's like, what are our values? How do we treat these maybe conscious machines?
Exactly. We can't just focus on the how anymore, the technology. We got to figure out the why.
The why. That's a good way to put it.
Like, why are we doing any of this? What kind of world are we building?
Big questions, and I don't think there are any easy answers. But that's kind of what makes this whole thing so fascinating, isn't it?
This definitely got me thinking.
Me too. And I hope it's got everyone listening thinking as well. So, if you're out there, and this has sparked some thoughts, we want to hear from you. Head over to our website, find us on social media. Let's keep this conversation going. Because like we've been saying, this isn't just about the science anymore. This is about all of us figuring out what it means to be human in the age of AI. And on that note, until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.